Hey there, motorcycle enthusiasts. Today, we have a special guest joining us, experienced police motorcycle officer Paul Carroll. He'll be sharing some valuable tips on basic motorcycle safety training, specifically focusing on clutch and throttle control, using the rear brake effectively, and the importance of head and eye positioning while riding at low speeds.
If you don't know what you're doing wrong, then you're never going to be able to fix your problem. That's the thing. And again, it all comes down to really three basic fundamentals, and that's clutch, throttle, rear brake, and head and eyes. All those three key pieces, if you really get mastered, you can do any pattern as long as you're operating within the maximum limits of the motorcycle.
Wait, what's the third one?
Clutch, throttle, rear brake, head and eyes. This is the most important. And a lot of people discount that. Your head and eyes will fix 90% of your problems. Your other 10% is clutch, throttle, rear brake. The rear brake comes into play because it allows you to kind of what I call feather the brake. You can lightly tap the brake. And I'll show you some different techniques on how to ride, where you should have your foot on the rear brake lever to keep from stabbing the brake, because you got to remember this, when you're at on road speed, so when you're out on any roadway 40, 45 miles an hour, your front brake is your friend, your rear brake is your enemy. You really don't want to use much rear brake at all. You get yourself in that sort of habit, and the reason being is because when you get into an emergency situation where you have to use maximum braking that this motorcycle can provide, if you don't do it correctly, then you're going to kick the bike into ABS if you have ABS, which means I look at ABS as a control system and not a braking system. Because ABS is just keeping the wheels from locking and keeps you upright. Doesn't get you stopped any faster. You clearly have the human ability to be able to override your ABS and get maximum braking on the motorcycle. Inside a parking lot, your friend is your rear brake, not your front. That's why you see people dump the bike in a parking lot. Because what they'll do is they'll take both feet off the floorboards, they'll brake only with their front brake. They really have no control over the motorcycle. If something goes wrong, they got no ability to adjust their friction zone because they can't stall their forward progress. Because if they use the only brake they got available to them, which is the front brake lever, because their right foot's out duck walking or out on the ground, then the bike is just going to lurch and the bike just dumps over. So when we're doing this stuff today, remember, do not touch your front brake at all. Keep your hand over your throttle. That's where it needs to be. Because you need to keep that RPM up in a band. I call that band that 12 to 1500 band, because that RPM is going to be enough to compensate for whatever power. When we talk about power, we talk about the clutch lever. That's what's producing power. We're on a gyroscope. As long as you keep sufficient power to the rear wheel, the gyroscope wants to stay up. It won't fall. The minute you pull the power from the rear wheel, the gyroscope will fall. So remember, when we're riding fast and straight, pretty easy. You can literally get the bike up to speed, put your cruise control on, jump off the bike, and the bike will continue to keep going until it hits something. When it's at slow speed, it requires every bit of your control. So this is what this is to help, is working this slow speed. But it also helps with just normal pullouts on a stop sign, pullouts on a red light, and being able to master your head and eyes, because it allows you to negotiate and avoid obstacles in the roadway. But more people drop their bike and are hurt more at slow speeds than there ever are at interstate speed. Okay, so when we're working today, remember, hand over the throttle, not on the front brake, all rear brake. All right, this first exercise we're going to do is going to kind of master that. And it's designed to put you in a frame of mind that you need to be in to operate the bike at slow speeds. That's how I'm able to take my bike at 900 some pounds and put it all the way onto the frame, the steering lock all the way out, and I'm still able to keep the bike upright. What I'm doing is I'm basically manipulating the friction zone, but I'm feathering my forward progress with the motorcycle by just lightly tapping that rear brake, and I'm keeping the throttle set at 12 to 1500 RPM. But it's all on my head and eyes as well. If I look down on the ground, at my level now, after having thousands of hours of training and working on a bike full time, I can look at the ground. I can do a lot of that the average rider can't do because I'm just used to it. I know where the bike has to be. But if you look at the ground, that's generally where you're going to put the motorcycle at. So you have to be able to look to where you want the motorcycle to go, and the motorcycle will go there. Your body, your brain will force your body to push the bike in that direction. Okay? So this is what this is designed to do, and it's easy for me to watch you and coach you through it than it is to just set up a pattern and say, hey, go practice, have fun. because if you don't know what you're doing wrong, you're never going to get better. You keep practicing the same riding skill sets, you never get better. You know, years ago, when I was the safety officer in this hog chapter, I used to talk about when people come out and say, oh, I've been riding for 30 years. And I asked them, what sort of training have you done? What sort of practice do you do? I don't do any of that. But you basically got 1 year experience 30 times. That's about all you got. Because you haven't done anything to force yourself to get beyond that basic skill level. And I've told some of the guys, some of the older guys in our chapter, I used to tell them, yeah, you got 30 years experience, but you've been riding like for 30 years, dude. You've been that close to freaking killing yourself every single damn year because you've got no ability to max or to control the motorcycle when some goes wrong in front of you. So that's what this is designed to do. While we don't really have the space to do a lot of braking, we'll talk about braking, you know, before we leave, you know, to help you. At some point in time, once we get a clear lot up at the freaking Riding Academy, when we can, you know, maybe we'll work on strictly doing threshold braking, because it's really a key skill set to save your life. Somebody pulls out in front of you on a 45-mile-an-hour roadway and you don't know how to properly threshold brake that machine, you're going to kick the bike in the ABS because you're going to panic, and that thing is just going to keep on trucking. You'll hear it skipping and skipping, but it's going to keep moving. It's designed to keep you upright, not designed to stop you. So with that, instead of having you follow me through and warm up, most of you just pulled in here, so I want to maximize use of time. The first exercise I want you to all to set up on is a single cone weave, and we're not going to do a single weave initially. What I want you to do is we're going to practice starting and stopping. That's all I want you to do. I want you to start high up on the saddle, good posture. Right foot should always be covering your rear brake at all times. When you're sitting still, bike should be in gear, clutch in, right foot is over, covering the rear brake, up on the right floorboard, head and eyes up nice and high. The reason being is that when you're stopped, if you're stopped at a stop sign or red light and there's nobody stacked up behind you, your biggest threat is coming from behind. All right, so if you look at a typical car that's traveling 45 or 50 in a 45-mile-an-hour zone and you do the calculation of how many feet per second is that, by the time you realize that this person's not going to get stopped, to get your right foot off the ground, up on the floorboard to get the bike in gear to go, you could talk about a second and a half, 2.5 seconds. You know, you see guys that, and it drives me wild, I'll watch them stop at a red light, they'll pop the bike in neutral, light a freaking cigarette up, both feet on the ground, have no concept of potential threats from behind. And if that is noticed, how many seconds it's going to take them to get the bike up, in gear up, and then react, that could be 3-4 seconds. Well, if you do the freaking calculations, that could be 180 feet, 200 feet. You know, you now are getting hit by something you probably could have avoided if you would have detected that threat from the get-go. So that's the posture that I want you in when you're going through this. And you'll find yourself, especially if you ride with a passenger on the back, you'll find it much more smoother to stop when you're controlling it with just your rear brake and you're not using your front brake. And when I'm talking about just your rear brake, when your speed's inside of that 10-mile-an-hour window, I kind of call it a short final. You should transition off your front brake lever, hand around the throttle, and then nothing but rear brake, nice and smooth. Head up on the horizon, you come to a nice smooth stop and plant your left foot. You squeeze that clutch in slowly, roll off the throttle, hit the rear brake, keep it up on the pedal, plant the left foot, and that's the posture you should be in until you get ready to take off on the bike again.
How many cars do you feel like of what you worked to be safe? 3, 5?
Three or more. Any front to rear end collision I've ever investigated, generally if it was the car up at the light is the third car or more from the back of the stack, it usually doesn't get hit with momentum. You got the one person that's got their head buried in their cell phone, they're riding 50 mile an hour in a 40 mile an hour zone, they moment, boom, they hit the car in front of them, that car momentum hits the car in front of them, you know, and generally we're not hitting the other car. You gotta be carrying pretty good speed to hit that. So usually when I've got 3 vehicles behind me, I'm not totally safe, but I'm a lot more comfortable. I don't have to constantly keep looking in my side view mirror.
What do you think about lane filtering to avoid a rear end collision?
That's the whole point of being prepared. My honest opinion, I don't like the lane filtering because we have not done a damn thing to educate the public about lane filtering. You know, and we as motorcyclists, we start doing things that the public is not used to, we're putting ourselves at much more risk by doing that. And that's what I can't stand about this state. We'll change laws, but yet we don't educate anybody that it may affect. And our biggest threat is people that are in cars and trucks on the road. And then when we lane filter, all of a sudden now you get people that are like, what the f is this dude doing? So you get those angry drivers out there that are now going to merge off to the right, trying to block you from lane filtering. To me, it puts us at more of a threat. We should have been educating our state drivers first on the airways before we started actually making the law, or putting the law into effect and allowing bikes to start doing it.
Well, my question is, and I thought about it, okay, lane filter, you get up, you're in traffic, you get to the end, there's cars right here, what are you supposed to do? Just sit right there and try to beat in front of them?
Yeah, that's really what you're trying to do. You're trying to take off before they take off, and I don't like it. It's lane filtering, obviously the cars have got to be a complete stop. You can only pass on certain sides of the car. You're getting up to the front of traffic.
I think it's dangerous.
Too many people are going to lane split.
Well, now you got people just lane split.
Yeah.
Because they're from, most people are from California in this state,
right.
So they're used to lane splitting. Now, when you watch them lane split in California, the motorists there are educated about lane splitting. So you watch, when we rode the sticker coach a couple of times, and we were in some of the outlying traffics of LA and Orange County area, you can watch people and you'll see the cars will divide out when they see a bike coming. They're used to it. They're accustomed. That's the way they've been driving for decades there. We haven't in Colorado. And now we're allowing people to lane filter. I got it, traffic's supposed to be stopped, but you're still not educating the public on this is allowed and this is what should be done, and we're just putting ourselves in. I myself on a big bagger
out there these days.
Yeah, if I was on a big touring bike, on my bike, I don't lane filter. I'm not coming up. I am not, first of all, I'm not putting a super wide ass bike in between cars that are stopped. You could get away with that maybe on, a lowrider S, lowrider ST, something that's maybe more narrow, but you get in these wide touring bikes, even a freaking Heritage is still a pretty wide bike. You're just asking for potential problems. And if you're doing that and your skill set's not good, then you're going to end up putting the bike into the side of a car unnecessarily. So my opinion, I'll never lane filter unless I think it's absolutely necessary.
Especially in a group.
Lane splitting is nice, but we never lane split the entire time in California when we come into traffic. Because I was not comfortable with it. And if it's not something that I'm used to doing, I'm not going to do it. It's just not work. My skill set's enough, and I know why motorcyclists do it, because they have a hard time riding at very slow speed and controlling the bike. So it's easier just to stay at 15 mile an hour, and it's a lot easier. Even though you can ride at super slow speed, it's not comfortable to be riding that friction zone the whole time, trying to keep the bike balanced. You can do it for a while, but after a period of time, it gets a little old. So yeah, I would be cautious with the lane filtering.
You get good at it with this training.
But the technique of lane filtering is exactly what you're going to do to escape a rear-end collision. Because that's why you have to be prepared. You see the guy, your foot's already up there. It's just nothing more than rolling throttle, engaging clutch, and around you go. When your feet are flat on the ground, the bike's in freaking neutral, you start counting. All right, getting gears, 1001, 1002, so maybe 3 seconds by the time you're able to get the bike on the move around. You're talking about 45 miles an hour and how many feet per second that car is traveling. And, maybe it's running the speed limit, maybe not. So, I mean, it's you'd be surprised at how close that car is going to close that gap on you. And you could have avoided that just by being able to be prepared to get out. We do a braking exercise called a brake and escape, and it's threshold braking, not coming to a complete stop, but yet doing a series of 90-degree turns and then out. It's designed to do that whole lane filter piece. Come to stop, get around traffic. Whatever was in front of me, I'm trying to get around to avoid getting smoked from behind. 50 mile an hour, you're gonna lock the rear brake up. If you have an ABS bike or reflex link bike, because you got a more modern Harley Davidson, it's going to introduce a percentage of braking power to both brakes. It's not going to be sufficient to really get you to the hard spot. Same thing when you're cornering. If you ever corner, professional racers can actually go into corners and they'll use what they call a trail braking technique with the front brake. But if you don't do it correctly, well, you've seen how some of them have ended up on King of the Baggers, and at 100-some mile an hour, they're getting thrown off the freaking bike. They're losing control, because that's a technique that you really have to master. You're better off braking all your momentum you need to brake before hitting a corner, and then getting off the brake, going into the corner, and if you still need to slow it a tad bit, is just to lightly feather the rear brake. Because the rear brake will keep you down into the lean, your front brake's going to pull you back up, okay? So, with that, great job. I mean, practice that. It's not hard to practice that. But when you're out on the roadway, get yourself into those sort of skill habits that you continue to keep working on. We work on this every time we're out on the road. Red lights, stop signs, you name it. Practice it. Now, for those of you that struggle with parking, that's exactly why you struggle with parking. So what we'll do from here is that before we leave today, we'll work on a parking drill, and I'll show you how easy parking really is. Parking's about two things: setup and map. Clutch, throttle, rear brake control, nice and smooth. It's about setup, knowing where am I going to pull this bike into, and it's all about head and eyes. This exercise will help you with that. This is a pull out from the left to right from the stop position. Once you can get a setup, it's nothing more than a look where I have to put the bike at. I do this little teardrop, which is push the bike the opposite direction, and then I go for it and I commit to the lean and the turn, the pull in, I get squared up, head on the horizon, nice slow stop. The reason being that your parking struggles is because a lot of times you give up that basic control, all right? And all of a sudden, what's that?
It's not because I'm short.
No. Being short had nothing to do with how well you did that piece right there. So there's no difference between these cones and this parking lot versus pulling into a parking space up there or any place. Now, it may be a little challenging if we're parking on a slope that's 12 degrees, you know, and it's super steep, and then that's going to take a little bit of technique, all right? And we all can get to that point. With modern day bikes now, I mean, you've got freaking hill assist that you can kick in. It will hold the bike, but eventually you're going to have to hit the brake to let off the hill assist and take off. So you're still going to have the skill sets. This next one we're going to work on is a single cone weave. Just what you did there, now you're not going to stop. Now you're going to weave in between the cones. So this requires you to make left, right transitions of the handlebar and slightly lean the bike over each time you do it. These are 17 feet apart. You don't really have to lean a whole lot. You can literally stand the bike up and down and go through this cone weave and never have to lean the motorcycle. I want you to try to lean the bike. But the key is staying in your friction zone. So when you were taking off, staying in that friction zone, that's what you need to maintain. A little more RPM. You need to bring the RPM up a little bit. You're going to feather that rear brake. Anytime you lean a motorcycle over, that clutch has got to have a heavier engagement, all right? Because the rear wheel is trying to hold the motorcycle up, all right? You pull back on the clutch, you pull the clutch in and the bike's leaned over, it's going to fall. Okay, the remedy is when I feel that the bike's going to fall is to not put your left foot out. The remedy is to let more clutch out. If you let more clutch out, the bike's going to pull away. Okay? So with the single cone weave, the whole idea is to keep your head up on the horizon, nice body posture, and you're doing nothing more than turning the bike, letting the bike lean up underneath you. Don't let your head come over with the bike. That's key. All right? Because when the head comes over with the bike, then your orientation, your brain gets kind of jacked up. Your sense of balance, your center of gravity gets messed up because you get a feeling that the bike is going over when the bike is over, but you don't have a good read on where the bike is at. You watch professional racers, you know, even now when we watch, you know, King of the Bagger series, and they're doing nothing more than taking a heavily modified road line with a higher. They've got a much. I think they got like a freaking 60-some degree freaking lean angle on this bike, so their bikes are much higher than a standard, obviously, road glide is. But nonetheless, when you watch them in a corner, you go back and watch some of the freaking races they had down in Daytona. They're hitting these corners at 140, 130 miles an hour, some of these tight corners. Even though that they're dragging their knee and almost on their elbow, look at their head orientation. Their head orientation is always straight up and down. That motorcycle's way over, but their head is straight. The reason why is that because if they let their head come over with the bike, they're just going to bury the bike into the ground. All right, so when you're doing any kind of weave or any kind of U-turn, you've got to remember to keep your head straight up. Look where you got to go. Here, you're just going to look straight down the cone pattern because all you're doing is letting your peripheral vision determine where that cone is at, where do I need to transition right, left, but I'm not letting my head come over. I'm keeping my head up square. I'm letting my body move underneath my head. Okay? Questions on that? Did everybody see me go through that single cone weave earlier? You know what we're talking about? Okay. You want to do it? Why don't you go jump on the bike? Now I'll go through it, and I go through it really fast just because I've got the ability to do that. This is not about speed, it's about technique. When you get the technique mastered, then you can start picking up your pace. Because if your technique is not good and you pick up the pace, and even I make mistakes where I start slamming that bike way over really hard, you can get yourself in a bind by doing it a little bit too hard. Once that frame hits the pavement, that's it, you're done. right? So, and always remember, you're always going to get more straightening on the left side of the bike than you are on the right side. So she's not having to lean a whole lot. She's keeping her head straight up and down, and she's doing nothing more than staying in that friction zone. You hear the motor, you hear the RPM up. She's staying in that friction zone with the clutch. You don't want to try to do it with momentum and just get momentum and pull the clutch in, because eventually you're going uphill. You're going to run out of power. All right, you might just fall over. So that's really what you need to focus on.